The stack of unpaid bills sat like a mountain on the kitchen table, casting a shadow over Emma Lawson's tired face. Her trembling fingers traced the funeral home's logo, a tasteful emblem of Pinewood Memorial Services that now felt like a mark of betrayal. The final invoice was nearly triple what they had agreed upon. Her son, Captain Michael Lawson, had given his life for his country in Afghanistan, and now this funeral director was exploiting their grief. Emma couldn't understand how someone could be so heartless, especially to a Gold Star family who had already sacrificed everything. What she didn't know, as she sat alone in her modest home on the outskirts of Riverdale, was that by morning an entire community of veterans would converge at that funeral home, led by a retired Marine Corps general who was about to teach everyone in town the true meaning of honor, respect, and standing up for those who've stood for us all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn morning carried a crisp chill as Emma Lawson drove to Pinewood Memorial Services. Her Honda Civic, 10 years old and showing every mile, seemed to hesitate at each intersection, as if reluctant to reach their destination. In the passenger seat, her daughter Lily stared silently out the window, her eyes still puffy from a night of tears. It had been 6 days since the notification officers had arrived at their door with news that had collapsed their world. Captain Michael Lawson, decorated Army Ranger, killed in action while leading his men through a treacherous mountain pass in Kandahar province. Emma parked in front of the funeral home, a stately Victorian converted into a business decades ago. The pristine white columns and manicured hedges projected an image of dignity and respect, values that Emma now questioned after yesterday's phone call. The funeral director, Robert Caldwell, had called to inform her that there were additional costs that needed to be addressed before her son's funeral could proceed the following day. "It's just a difficult situation," he had explained in his practiced, sympathetic voice. "Military honors are quite complex, and there are several additional services required for someone of your son's standing." Lily touched her mother's arm. Gently, "Mom, we don't have to do this. We can find another funeral home." Emma shook her head. "There's no time. The service is tomorrow, and Michael is already—" Her voice cracked. "He's already here." They walked up the stone path leading to the entrance, each step feeling heavier than the last. The massive oak door opened before they reached it, revealing Robert Caldwell in an impeccably tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile practiced and professional. "Mrs. Lawson, Ms. Lawson," he greeted them with a slight bow of his head. "Please come in. I know this is a difficult time. Let's talk in my office where we'll be comfortable." Caldwell's office matched his appearance. Tasteful, expensive, designed to impress. Family photos in silver frames adorned his mahogany desk, showing a smiling wife and 2 college-aged children. Behind him hung numerous certificates and community service awards. The walls were a soothing sage green, the lighting soft and indirect. "Mrs. Lawson," he began after they were seated in plush leather chairs, "I understand your concerns about the revised estimate. Please know that we at Pinewood take great pride in honoring our fallen heroes." Emma placed the invoice on his desk, her finger pointing to the bottom line, $21,850. Nearly triple the $7,500 they had originally agreed upon. "This isn't what we discussed, Mr. Caldwell. This isn't what I signed." Caldwell leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Yes, and I deeply apologize for that. When we made our initial arrangements, we weren't aware of Captain Lawson's distinguished service record. The military honor guard, the specialized casket suitable for a soldier of his rank, the additional staff needed for the expected attendance. These all incur costs that weren't in our original estimate." Lily shifted in her seat. "My brothers, rank and service were the first things my mother told you. A flash of annoyance crossed Caldwell's face before his professional mask slipped back into place. Perhaps there was a miscommunication. Regardless, these are the actual costs for the level of service Captain Lawson deserves. Emma felt her grief momentarily displaced by a surge of anger. We can't afford this. My husband passed away 3 years ago. Michael was helping us make ends meet. We simply don't have this kind of money. Caldwell's expression remained sympathetic, but his eyes hardened. I understand. And we've already applied our military family discount. Perhaps there are other family members who could contribute, or payment arrangements can be made, though we would need a substantial deposit before tomorrow's service. In the corner of the office, a television played silently, the morning news scrolling across the bottom of the screen. None of them paid it any attention, unaware that it was broadcasting a story that would soon intersect with their lives. "Mr. Caldwell," Emma said, her voice finding strength. "My son died serving this country. The military provides benefits for funeral services. The original amount covers everything we need." Caldwell sighed, a practiced sound that had likely preceded countless upsells to grieving families. "Mrs. Lawson, the military death benefit covers basic services. Captain Lawson was a hero. Would you really want him sent off with just basic services?" The manipulation was as transparent as it was effective. Emma felt tears threatening to spill again. Lily reached over and squeezed her mother's hand. "Could we see him?" Lily asked suddenly. "Before we discuss anything else, we'd like to see my brother." Caldwell hesitated. "He's been prepared for viewing, but the formal visitation isn't scheduled until this evening. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now, back to the story. "Please," Emma said, "we just need a moment with him." After a pause, Caldwell nodded and stood. "Of course. Follow me." He led them through hushed corridors to a viewing room at the rear of the building. The room was dim, lit only by wall sconces that cast a gentle glow. At the front, in an open casket of gleaming mahogany, lay Captain Michael Lawson. He was dressed in his army service uniform, the blue jacket adorned with the medals and ribbons that told the story of his courage and sacrifice. Emma approached slowly, Lily at her side. Michael looked peaceful, almost as if he were sleeping. His strong jaw, so like his father's, was set in a serene expression. Emma reached out a trembling hand to touch his cheek. "Oh, Michael," she whispered, "my brave boy." Behind them, Caldwell stood respectfully at the door, allowing them this private moment while remaining close enough to monitor their time. Business considerations never far from his mind. As Emma stood beside her son's body, memories washed over her like waves. Michael at 7, proudly wearing his father's too large veteran's cap. Michael at 18, standing tall in his first uniform after basic training. Michael at 26, kneeling to hug his mother before his 3rd deployment, promising he'd be home before she knew it, a promise that life and war had not allowed him to keep. "Mr. Caldwell," she said without turning around, "my son gave everything for his country. I won't let his memory be tarnished by haggling over costs he would never have approved of. Mrs. Lawson, we'll pay the original agreed amount," she continued firmly. "Not a penny more. My son would want dignity, not extravagance." Caldwell's professional demeanor slipped further. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Contracts have been signed, services arranged. The additional elements have already been ordered." "Services I never requested," Emma countered. "Items I never approved." The tension in the room was broken by the sound of the funeral home's front door opening, followed by multiple sets of footsteps in the hallway. Caldwell frowned, checking his watch. "Excuse me a moment, we're not expecting anyone this early." He stepped out, closing the door behind him. Through the door, Emma and Lily could hear muffled voices, Caldwell's rising in what sounded like protest, followed by a deeper voice that carried the unmistakable tone of authority. In the reception area of Pinewood Memorial Services, Robert Caldwell found himself facing a group of 7 people in military uniforms. At their center stood a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 60s, his posture ramrod straight despite his age, his chest bearing the insignia of a retired Marine Corps general. This was General James Anderson, a man whose reputation in military circles was legendary. "Mr. Caldwell," the general said, his voice level but carrying an undertone of steel, "I'm General James Anderson. These are members of the Veterans Service Coalition. We're here about Captain Michael Lawson." Caldwell's expression flickered between confusion and apprehension. "I'm afraid I don't understand. The family is here now, making private arrangements. If you're here for the visitation, that's not until this evening." Anderson fixed him with a steady gaze. "We're not here for the visitation. We're here because it's come to our attention that a Gold Star family is being charged excessive fees for a hero's funeral." Caldwell's face flushed. "Sir, with all due respect, our business arrangements with the Lawson family are private matters." "Not anymore," Anderson replied. He gestured to a woman beside him in an Air Force uniform. "Colonel Rivera here is a military lawyer. She's very interested in the pricing discrepancies we've been informed about." "Informed? By whom?" Caldwell demanded, his professional veneer cracking further. From behind the group stepped a young man in his 20s, dressed in a suit but with the unmistakable bearing of a soldier. "By me, sir. Jake Simmons. I work here. Or I did until yesterday when I called General Anderson after seeing what you were doing to the Lawson family." Caldwell's face hardened as he recognized the young funeral assistant he had recently hired and fired when the young man had questioned the Lawson invoice. "You were terminated for insubordination," Caldwell said coldly. "I was terminated for refusing to be part of exploiting a Gold Star family," Jake countered. Before Caldwell could respond, the door to the viewing room opened, and Emma and Lily stepped out, drawn by the commotion. They looked with surprise at the uniformed group. Standing in the reception area, General Anderson turned toward them, his stern expression softening. He removed his cover and approached Emma with the respect of one who understood the depth of her loss. "Mrs. Lawson, I'm James Anderson. Your son served under my command during his first deployment. I've come to ensure he receives the honor he deserves, without his family being taken advantage of in their time of grief." Emma looked at the general, recognition dawning. "You're the general? Michael spoke of you in his letters. He said you were the kind of leader who never left anyone behind." Anderson nodded solemnly. "And I still don't, ma'am. Not in the field and not at home." Caldwell attempted to regain control of the situation. "General Anderson, while your concern is appreciated, this is still a private business matter between Pinewood Memorial Services and the Lawson family." Colonel Rivera stepped forward, opening a folder she carried. "Mr. Caldwell, we've reviewed the pricing documentation that Mr. Simmons provided us. There appear to be significant discrepancies between your standard rates and what you're charging the Lawson family. Discrepancies that could constitute fraud, especially given the protected status of military death benefits." The color drained from Caldwell's face. "That information is proprietary. Mr. Simmons had no right." "Mr. Simmons had every right," Anderson interrupted, "as a citizen witnessing potential fraud and as a veteran himself." Jake stepped forward. "Sir, I served 4 years in the Army. My brother didn't come home from his tour. When I saw what you were doing to another family like mine, I couldn't stay silent." Emma looked between them, piecing together what was happening. "You reported him because of our bill?" Jake nodded. Mrs. Lawson, I overheard Mr. Caldwell instructing the staff to add services to your invoice, services he knew the military would cover separately. He's been doing this to military families for years. Caldwell's professional facade completely collapsed. These are baseless accusations. You have no proof. Actually, said another member of the group, an older man with a Veterans Affairs identification badge, we have extensive documentation. After Mr. Simmons contacted us, we reached out to other military families who used your services. The pattern is quite clear. Emma stood straighter, drawing strength from these unexpected allies. Mr. Caldwell was just explaining why our bill tripled overnight for services we never requested. General Anderson's eyes narrowed as he turned to Caldwell. Is that so? Perhaps you'd like to explain it to all of us now. Caldwell looked around, seeing himself surrounded by determined faces. His shoulders slumped slightly. There may have been some misunderstandings about optional services. Misunderstandings? Colonel Rivera echoed skeptically. Mr. Caldwell, intentionally misleading bereaved families about costs, particularly when those families are protected under military family provisions, isn't a misunderstanding. It's potentially criminal. Outside the funeral home, more vehicles began arriving. Through the windows, Emma could see men and women, many in uniform, others in civilian clothes with military bearing, gathering on the lawn. Word had spread through the veterans' community, and they had come to stand with one of their own. Caldwell saw them too, his expression growing increasingly alarmed. What is this? Some kind of protest? This is highly inappropriate. It's not a protest, Anderson said firmly. It's a presence. These men and women served alongside Captain Lawson and others like him. They're here to ensure his memory and his family are respected. He paused, letting his words sink in. Now, I suggest we revisit the Lawson family's invoice immediately. Caldwell hesitated, but looking at the growing crowd outside and the resolute faces before him, he recognized his position was untenable. Fine. Let's discuss this in my office. As they moved toward the office, Jake Simmons hung back beside Emma and Lily. Mrs. Lawson, there's something else you should know. About tomorrow. Emma looked at him questioningly. Before I was fired, I made some calls, Jake explained, to Captain Lawson's unit and to the local veterans organizations about the honor guard for tomorrow's service. Lily frowned. Mr. Caldwell said we'd have to pay extra for a proper honor guard. Jake shook his head, disgust clear on his face. That's not how it works. The military provides honor guards for fallen service members. It's their right, not an upgrade option. So there will be an honor guard? Emma asked. Jake smiled for the first time. Mrs. Lawson, by this time tomorrow, this town will see an honor guard like nothing they've ever witnessed before. In Caldwell's office, the atmosphere was tense, as Colonel Rivera methodically went through each item on the inflated invoice, highlighting discrepancies and inappropriate charges. Caldwell offered weak justifications that withered under her precise questioning. This ceremonial casket upgrade, she noted, priced at $4,200 above the standard model. Yet according to military specifications, the standard model already meets all requirements for military honors. Our premium casket offers enhanced features, Caldwell began. Features that provide no functional difference and that the family never requested, Rivera countered. General Anderson stood by the window watching the crowd outside grow larger. Veterans of different eras, from Vietnam to the recent conflicts in the Middle East, unified in purpose. Some wore parts of old uniforms, others simple pins or patches that identified their service. Many carried flags. Mr. Caldwell, he said without turning from the window, do you understand what you're witnessing out there? Caldwell looked up from the invoice discussion. Excuse me? That gathering, do you know what it represents? Caldwell's expression suggested he saw only a potential public relations disaster. I'm not sure what you're asking. Anderson turned to face him. That's the problem. You've been profiting from military families without understanding the first thing about military values. He gestured toward the window. Those people out there, they understand that when one of us falls, we all feel it. When one family suffers, we all carry that burden. It's called brotherhood, Mr. Caldwell, and it doesn't end when the uniform comes off. Emma, who had been quietly listening to Colonel Rivera's methodical dismantling of the fraudulent charges, felt something stir within her, a sense of belonging to something larger than her grief, a community bound by shared sacrifice and mutual respect. Tomorrow, Anderson continued, Captain Michael Lawson will be laid to rest with full military honors, as is his right. Not because his family paid extra, but because he earned it with his service and his sacrifice. And every person standing out there will be in attendance, not because they were invited, but because that's what we do. We show up for our own. Colonel Rivera closed her folder with finality. Based on our review, the appropriate charge for the services agreed upon is $7,350. Additionally, Mr. Caldwell, my office will be conducting a full audit of your billing practices for all military families served by Pinewood Memorial Services over the past 5 years. Caldwell's face had gone pale. That's not necessary. I'm sure we can resolve this matter privately. That opportunity passed when you decided to exploit a gold star, Mother, Anderson replied. Jake Simmons, who had been standing quietly near the door, spoke up. Mr. Caldwell, there's a news van pulling up outside. Caldwell's head snapped up in alarm. What? Why would there be news? I might have mentioned to a friend at Channel 7 that there would be a significant gathering of veterans here today, Jake said. Supporting a Gold Star family makes for a compelling human interest story, don't you think? The implications weren't lost on Caldwell. His business reputation in the community, the potential legal consequences, the public relations disaster, unfolding on his doorstep, all because he'd tried to squeeze extra profit from a grieving military family. What do you want? He asked, his voice hollow. General Anderson answered. Correct the Lawson invoice, immediately. Refund any deposits they've made toward these fraudulent charges, and prepare to make full restitution to every military family you've overcharged. And, Emma added, finding her voice strengthened by the support surrounding her, a public apology. Not to me, but to every military family you've taken advantage of. Caldwell looked as though he might argue, but a glance out the window at the growing crowd and the news van setting up changed his mind. Fine, I'll revise the invoice immediately. As Caldwell began typing at his computer, Anderson moved to stand beside Emma. Mrs. Lawson, there's something else you should know about tomorrow. Your son won't just have a standard honor guard. Emma looked up at him questioningly. Captain Lawson saved lives during his last mission. Men from 3 different units owe their lives to his leadership and his sacrifice. They've been granted emergency leave to be here. Anderson's voice carried pride and sorrow in equal measure. The honor guard tomorrow will include representatives from every branch of service, including some of the very men your son saved. Tears filled Emma's eyes, but they were different from those she had shed earlier, not just tears of grief, but of pride and gratitude. He would have been honored. He never thought he did anything special. He just said he did what needed doing. Anderson nodded, the mark of a true leader. Lily, who had been quietly taking everything in, asked, How did you know? About what was happening here? Anderson glanced at Jake. Mr. Simmons here made some calls. Word travels fast in our community when one of our families needs support. Jake shrugged modestly. I just reached out to a few local veterans. General Anderson was actually in Washington when he heard. He flew in this morning. From Washington? Emma asked, surprised. Your son served under my command, Mrs. Lawson, Anderson replied simply. As I said, we don't leave our people behind. Outside, the gathering had grown to over 100 people. Some had brought chairs for the elderly veterans. Others had set up a small refreshment station. It wasn't a protest. There were no angry chants or accusatory signs. It was a vigil, a presence, a statement that this community stood with the Lawson family. Caldwell finished revising the invoice and printing it out. The new total matched the original estimate. "Here," he said, sliding it across the desk. "Will there be anything else?" Colonel Rivera took the invoice, reviewed it carefully, and handed it to Emma. "This appears to be in order. However, our investigation into your business practices will continue." "And the apology," Emma reminded him. Caldwell's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "I'll prepare a statement." "Not a prepared statement," Anderson corrected. "Those people out there, many of them have buried comrades, children, spouses. They deserve to hear directly from you." For a moment, it seemed Caldwell might refuse. Then, with resignation, he stood. "Very well." The group moved to the front entrance of the funeral home. As the doors opened, a hush fell over the gathered crowd. Emma was overwhelmed by the sight. Men and women of all ages, some in wheelchairs, others standing tall despite grey hair and lined faces, united in support of a family most of them had never met. General Anderson addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for coming. The situation has been resolved. The Lawson family will be paying only what was originally agreed upon." A murmur of approval rippled through the gathering. "Mr. Caldwell has something he would like to say to you all." Reluctantly, Caldwell stepped forward. The crowd's expression was not angry, but expectant, watching him with the steady gaze of people who had seen far worse than an uncomfortable public moment. He began, then cleared his throat. "I want to apologize to the Lawson family and to any other military families who may have been charged inappropriately for services at Pinewood Memorial. It was not in keeping with the respect owed to those who have served our country." His words were stiff, corporate, lacking genuine remorse. The crowd received them in silence, neither accepting nor rejecting the apology, simply witnessing it. Emma stepped forward. "Thank you all for being here today. My son Michael would have been overwhelmed by your support. He never thought of himself as special. He was just doing his job, serving his country alongside people he respected and loved. Tomorrow we will lay him to rest, and knowing that his military family will be there with us brings more comfort than I can express." A voice from the crowd called out, "We'll all be there, ma'am, for the captain and for you." Murmurs of agreement spread through the gathering. Jake Simmons leaned closer to Emma. "They mean it, Mrs. Lawson. They'll all be here tomorrow." As the crowd began to disperse, many approaching Emma personally to offer condolences and share brief stories of military camaraderie, General Anderson pulled Jake aside. "You did the right thing, son," Anderson said. "Not many would risk their job to stand up for what's right." Jake shrugged. "I didn't serve with Captain Lawson, but I know what he represented, what they all represent." He looked toward Emma, now surrounded by veterans offering support. "My brother didn't make it home from Afghanistan. His funeral director did the same thing to my parents. I wasn't going to let it happen to another family." Anderson nodded in understanding. "What will you do now, after losing this job?" "I don't know, sir. I was using this position to pay for mortuary science school. I want to provide proper services for veterans and their families. Do it right." Anderson considered this. "The VA has a program that might interest you. They're always looking for funeral directors who understand military culture. Come see me after tomorrow's service. We'll talk." As the afternoon progressed, the crowd thinned, but a core group remained, setting up a rotating watch outside the funeral home. An informal honor guard, ensuring that nothing would interfere with Captain Lawson's dignity in death. Emma and Lily stayed for a while, receiving condolences and hearing stories about military brotherhood that helped them understand Michael's world a little better. When they finally left, driving home in the fading autumn light, Emma felt something she hadn't expected to find today, a sense of peace. The grief remained, a weight she would carry forever, but it was lightened somehow by the knowledge that Michael had been part of something powerful and enduring. "Mom," Lily said as they turned onto their street, "do you think all those people will really come tomorrow?" Emma thought about the faces she had seen today, the determined support, the sense of duty that transcended personal convenience. "Yes," she replied with certainty, "they'll be there, for Michael and for us." What neither of them could have imagined was just how many would come, or how a community's response to injustice would transform a day of mourning into something that would be remembered in their town for generations to come. The morning of Captain Michael Lawson's funeral dawned with a sky so vividly blue it seemed painted rather than real. Emma Lawson stood at her bedroom window, watching the sun climb over the eastern horizon, casting long shadows across her lawn. She had barely slept, her mind cycling between grief, gratitude for yesterday's unexpected support, and anxiety about the day ahead. Her son's dress uniform hung on her closet door, the one he had worn to his cousin's wedding last year, pressed and ready for Lily to bring to the funeral home. Michael would be buried in his battle uniform, but Emma wanted this one displayed at the service, a reminder of her son in happier times. The clock on her nightstand read 6:17 a.m. The funeral wasn't until 11, hours to get through somehow. She made her way downstairs, the house quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood. In the kitchen, she found Lily already awake, staring into a cup of coffee gone cold. "You couldn't sleep either?" Emma asked, touching her daughter's shoulder. Lily shook her head. "I kept thinking about yesterday. All those people showing up for us, for Michael, people we didn't even know." Emma started making fresh coffee, the familiar routine providing small comfort. "Your brother touched more lives than we realized." "Mom," Lily said hesitantly, "do you think Dad would have handled yesterday better, the situation with the funeral director?" Emma considered this as she measured coffee grounds. Her husband, Thomas, had been gone 3 years now. A sudden heart attack taking him far too young. "Your father would have raised hell the moment he saw that bill," she said with a small smile. "But I think he would have been proud of how we handled it, not alone, but with help." As the coffee brewed, Emma's phone chimed with a text message. It was from Jake Simmons. "Mrs. Lawson, just wanted to let you know everything is prepared for today. Don't worry about anything. Your son will be honored properly." She showed the message to Lily. "That young man risked his job for us." "For Michael," Lily corrected gently, "for what Michael represented." They sat together in the kitchen as morning light gradually filled the room, sharing memories of Michael, not the soldier, but the boy who had built elaborate fort cities in the backyard, the teenager who had taken Lily to her high school prom. When her date cancelled last minute, the young man who called his mother every Sunday, no matter where he was deployed. At 8:30, the doorbell rang. Emma opened the front door to find a young woman in an army dress uniform, her posture formal but her expression compassionate. "Mrs. Lawson, I'm Lieutenant Sarah Reeves. I served with your son in Afghanistan." She hesitated. "I apologize for coming unannounced, but I wanted to offer my assistance today, whatever you need." Emma invited her in, noting the lieutenant's red-rimmed eyes that suggested recent tears, despite her composed demeanor. "Michael spoke of you in his letters," Emma said, as they settled in the living room. "You were his communications specialist, weren't you?" Lieutenant Reeves nodded, surprised. "Yes, ma'am. I didn't realize he mentioned me." He said you were the best radio operator he'd ever worked with, that you once maintained comms through an 18-hour firefight with a damaged unit. A sad smile touched the lieutenant's lips. That was Michael, Captain Lawson, always bragging about his team, never himself. Over the next hour, as they prepared for the funeral, Lieutenant Reeves shared stories about Michael's leadership, how he insisted on taking the same risks as his soldiers, how he remembered personal details about each person under his command, how he had once carried a wounded Afghan child 3 miles to a medical station after an IED explosion in a village. "He never told us any of this," Lily said, carefully folding Michael's dress uniform into a garment bag. "He wouldn't have," Reeves replied. "He didn't think any of it was exceptional, just doing what needed to be done," he'd say. At 10:15, they left for the funeral home, Lieutenant Reeves driving them in her car. As they approached Pinewood Memorial Services, Emma gasped. The street was lined with vehicles, cars, trucks, motorcycles with veteran insignia, even buses from neighboring towns. People in uniform and civilian clothes stood in organized formation along the path leading to the entrance. "What is this?" Emma whispered. Lieutenant Reeves smiled through tears. "This is what happens when one of our own falls, Mrs. Lawson. We show up." Robert Caldwell waited at the entrance, his professional mask firmly back in place, though his eyes betrayed anxiety at the unprecedented gathering. General Anderson stood beside him, a silent reminder of yesterday's confrontation and resolution. "Mrs. Lawson," Caldwell greeted her with careful politeness, "everything has been arranged according to the original plan. The chapel is prepared." General Anderson's presence seemed to have a restraining effect on the funeral director, who led them inside without further comment. The viewing room had been transformed into a chapel for the service, with rows of chairs already filled to capacity. At the front stood Michael's casket, draped with the American flag, surrounded by displays of photographs Emma had provided. Michael, through the years, from a grinning child to a proud soldier. What caught Emma's breath was the honor guard. Not the standard detail she had expected, but an assembly of service members from every branch, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, standing at perfect attention around her son's casket. Their faces were solemn, their uniforms immaculate, their presence a physical manifestation of respect. Jake Simmons appeared at her side. "Mrs. Lawson, the service is ready to begin whenever you are. We've had to set up video feeds to 3 overflow rooms. There are more people than we anticipated." 3 overflow rooms, Emma repeated, stunned. Jake nodded. "Word spread after yesterday. Veterans from 6 states have arrived since dawn. There's a contingent from Michael's first deployment, another from his training unit. His college ROTC instructor brought current cadets." He paused. "And there are 7 men here who were on his final mission, the ones he saved." Emma felt her knees weaken slightly. Lieutenant Reeves steadied her with a gentle hand. "Are you ready, Mrs. Lawson?" Jake asked. Emma looked at the crowded chapel, at the honor guard standing watch over her son, at General Anderson, who had flown from Washington to ensure Michael received the respect he deserved. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." As they moved to their places in the front row, a hush fell over the assembly. The chaplain, a veteran himself with silver at his temples, stepped forward to begin the service. His opening words set the tone not of despair, but of honor and gratitude for a life well lived, though too brief. "We gather today," he began, "not only to mourn Captain Michael Thomas Lawson, but to celebrate a life defined by service, courage, and an unwavering commitment to others. In Scripture, we are told that greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." Captain Lawson embodied this ultimate expression of love, not just in his final act of heroism, but in how he lived each day. Emma listened As the chaplain spoke of sacrifice and duty, concepts that had once seemed abstract, but now carried the weight of her son's life and death. She was vaguely aware of more people quietly entering, standing along the walls when no seats remained. After the chaplain's opening, General Anderson approached the podium. His commanding presence drew every eye, his voice carrying to the farthest corners of the room without need of amplification. I first met Lieutenant Michael Lawson 8 years ago, during a deployment that tested every man and woman under my command. What distinguished him, even then as a young officer, wasn't tactical brilliance or physical courage, though he possessed both in abundance. It was his fundamental understanding that leadership isn't about rank or authority, it's about responsibility. Anderson shared a story of Michael leading a 72-hour mission to rescue a downed pilot in hostile territory, how he had refused extraction until every member of his team was accounted for, how he had given his water ration to an exhausted soldier while continuing to lead from the front. Captain Lawson never asked his people to take risks he wouldn't take himself, Anderson continued. He understood that true leadership isn't shouting orders from safety. It's standing shoulder to shoulder with those you lead, especially in moments of greatest danger. As Anderson spoke, Emma noticed Robert Caldwell standing at the back of the chapel, his expression troubled as he witnessed the outpouring of respect for a man whose memory he had been willing to exploit just yesterday. The contrast between his mercenary approach and the selfless service being described couldn't have been more stark. After General Anderson, others rose to speak. Fellow officers, soldiers who had served under Michael's command, childhood friends who had known him before he donned a uniform. Each story added another dimension to Emma's understanding of her son, revealing aspects of his character she had glimpsed but never fully comprehended. A young sergeant with a prosthetic leg described how Captain Lawson had carried him to safety, under heavy fire, then visited him every day during his recovery. A fellow captain spoke of Michael's insistence on writing personal letters to the families of fallen soldiers, spending hours ensuring each letter captured the soldiers' unique contributions and character. A local high school teacher recounted how Michael, home on leave, had spent time mentoring troubled students, connecting with them through shared stories of overcoming obstacles. Through it all, Emma sat with her back straight, drawing strength from Lily's hand in hers and from the community of support surrounding them. The grief remained, a physical ache in her chest, but alongside it grew something else. Pride, yes, but also a deepening understanding of why Michael had chosen the path he had, why he had felt the risks were worth taking. As the formal tributes concluded, the chaplain invited anyone who wished to share brief memories to come forward. Emma was unprepared for the line that formed. Dozens of people, many of whom she had never met, each with a story about how Michael had touched their lives. A young woman in civilian clothes spoke of how Captain Lawson had helped establish a school in an Afghan village, personally securing funding for books and supplies. An elderly veteran described meeting Michael at a VA hospital where the captain volunteered during leaves, bringing comfort and companionship to those still fighting battles long after returning home. A young lieutenant, his voice breaking with emotion, recounted how Michael had talked him through a moment of paralyzing fear during their first firefight, not with harsh commands, but with steady reassurance that acknowledged the fear while inspiring action despite it. As the stories continued, Emma noticed something remarkable happening. The atmosphere in the chapel was transforming. What had begun as a solemn occasion of mourning was becoming something else, a celebration of a life fully lived, a recognition that while Michael's death left a void, his life had created ripples that continued to spread outward, touching countless others. Robert Caldwell remained at the back of the room, his expression shifting from discomfort to something more complex, as story after story revealed the true measure of the man whose memory he had tried to monetize. Jake Simmons stood near him, occasionally glancing in his former employer's direction, monitoring his reaction. When the last person had spoken, the chaplain returned to the podium. Before he could continue, Caldwell stepped forward, hesitant but determined. "Chaplain, if I may," he asked quietly. The chaplain looked to Emma, who, after a moment's consideration, nodded her permission. Caldwell approached the podium, visibly uncomfortable under the gaze of hundreds who knew of yesterday's events. He cleared his throat. "I didn't know, Captain Lawson," he began, his voice uncharacteristically tentative. "Until today, he was just a name on paperwork to me, a transaction." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "Yesterday, I made a terrible mistake. I treated the funeral of a hero as a business opportunity. I tried to profit from a family's grief." A murmur ran through the assembly, but no one interrupted. "Listening to these stories today, I've been forced to confront the distance between who I've become and who I should be," Caldwell continued. "Mrs. Lawson," he said, turning to face Emma directly, "your son exemplified honor and service. My actions dishonored his memory and everything he stood for. For that, I am truly sorry." The apology hung in the air, unexpected and unscripted, far more genuine than yesterday's forced statement. Emma met his gaze and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but recognition of the difficult step he had taken. Caldwell returned to his place at the back of the room as the chaplain resumed the service. The honor guard stepped forward for the ceremonial folding of the flag that draped Michael's casket. Their movements were precisely choreographed, each fold made with deliberate care and reverence. When the flag was transformed into a tight triangle, the senior member of the honor guard presented it to Emma. "On behalf of a grateful nation," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service." Emma received the flag, holding it close to her heart as taps began to play. The mournful notes filled the chapel, their simple melody carrying centuries of tradition and remembrance. As the final notes faded, General Anderson approached Emma once more. "Mrs. Lawson, there's something else. Captain Lawson's men have requested permission to serve as his pallbearers, the men whose lives he saved on his final mission." Emma nodded, unable to speak through the tightness in her throat. 6 soldiers, all bearing visible evidence of injuries sustained in battle, stepped forward. With solemn dignity, they positioned themselves beside Michael's casket. At a nod from the lead pallbearer, they lifted it with synchronized precision and began the slow procession out of the chapel. What awaited outside took Emma's breath away. The street had been closed to traffic. Thousands of people lined the route to the cemetery, many holding American flags, others with hands over hearts. A motorcycle honor guard of veterans waited to escort the hearse. Police officers stood at attention, their badges striped with black mourning bands. As Michael's casket emerged from the funeral home, a command rang out, and every service member present snapped to attention, rendering a final salute to their fallen comrade. The sight of so many, from aging Vietnam veterans to young recruits, united in respect, brought fresh tears to Emma's eyes. The procession to the cemetery stretched for over a mile, led by the motorcycle honor guard, their engines a low, respectful rumble. At every intersection, police officers stood at attention, stopping traffic as the procession passed. Along the route, citizens of Riverdale emerged from businesses and homes to stand in silent tribute. At the cemetery, an even larger crowd had gathered. The military section, where Michael would be laid to rest, was surrounded by a sea of people, standing in respectful silence. Emma recognized some as veterans from yesterday's gathering at the funeral home, but many were ordinary citizens who had come to honor a hometown hero. The graveside service was brief but powerful. The honor guard positioned the casket, the chaplain offered final prayers, and a 7-member rifle detail fired 3 volleys, the traditional rifle salute. As the echo of the last volley faded, 4 F-16 fighter jets appeared overhead in the missing man formation, one aircraft pulling away to symbolize the fallen. After the formal ceremony concluded, General Anderson approached Emma and Lily once more. "Mrs. Lawson, there are some people who would like to meet you, if you feel up to it. The men from Michael's final mission." Emma nodded, and Anderson led her to a group of 6 soldiers standing a respectful distance from the grave. They ranged in age from early 20s to mid-30s, all bearing the physical marks of combat, scars, prosthetics, one in a wheelchair. As Emma approached, they straightened to attention. "Mrs. Lawson," said the oldest of the group, a staff sergeant with a jagged scar running down his left cheek. "I'm Staff Sergeant David Ramirez. We were with your son in Kandahar. What he did for us." His voice faltered. Another soldier, younger with a prosthetic hand, continued, "Ma'am, we're alive because of Captain Lawson. Our unit was ambushed. Communication was cut off. We were surrounded, taking heavy fire. Michael led a counterattack," a third soldier added, "drew enemy fire away from our position, created an extraction route. He knew exactly what he was doing and what it might cost." Staff Sergeant Ramirez regained his composure. "We wanted you to know that he didn't suffer, ma'am. It was quick, and he succeeded. Every one of us made it out because of his actions." Emma looked at these men, living testimonies to her son's final act of leadership. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "It helps to know his sacrifice had meaning." "More than meaning, ma'am," said the soldier in the wheelchair. "It gave us futures, families, children who will be born because of what your son did." He gestured to the massive gathering around them. "Everyone here understands the weight of his gift." As Emma spoke with the men her son had saved, Lily found herself approached by Lieutenant Reeves, who had stayed close throughout the day. "Your brother changed lives everywhere he went," Reeves said quietly. "Not just on the battlefield, in training, in garrison, in the communities where we deployed. He had this ability to see what people needed and find ways to provide it." "That was Michael," Lily agreed. "Even as a kid, he was always looking out for others. I just never realized how many others there were." Nearby, Jake Simmons stood, with General Anderson, watching the interactions with a mixture of sorrow and satisfaction. "You did the right thing, son," Anderson said. "Standing up for what's right isn't always easy, especially when it comes at personal cost." Jake nodded. "After seeing all this, I know it was worth it. Worth losing my job. Worth whatever comes next." "About that," Anderson replied, "I meant what I said yesterday. The VA needs people who understand what military families go through, people who recognize that a funeral isn't just a business transaction, it's a sacred trust." He handed Jake a business card. "Call this number on Monday. They're expecting to hear from you." As the afternoon progressed, the crowd slowly dispersed. Some approached Emma to offer final condolences. Others simply paid their respects at a distance, understanding that grief requires space as much as support. Through it all, Emma remained upright, drawing strength from the community that had assembled to honor her son. Robert Caldwell approached her one last time before departing. "Mrs. Lawson, I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know that Pinewood will be implementing new policies for military families. Transparent pricing, no upselling, coordination with VA benefits." He hesitated. "It's not enough, I know, but it's a start." Emma regarded him thoughtfully. Mr. Caldwell, my son believed people could change, could be better than their worst moments. I hope he was right. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the cemetery in golden light, only a small group remained. Emma and Lily, Lieutenant Reeves, General Anderson, Jake Simmons, and the men from Michael's final mission. They stood in a loose circle around the grave, connected by their shared love for a man who had given everything for others. Mrs. Lawson, General Anderson said gently, it's traditional after a military funeral for the closest comrades to share a toast to the fallen. With your permission, we'd like to include you and Lily in this tradition. From a small case, he produced a set of shot glasses and a bottle of fine bourbon, Michael's favorite, Emma recognized with a pang of remembrance. Anderson poured a measure into each glass, then one more that he placed on Michael's grave. To Captain Michael Lawson, he said, raising his glass, a leader who understood that true strength lies not in what you take, but in what you give. May we honor his memory by living as he did, with courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment to others. They drank together as the setting sun cast long shadows across the cemetery grounds, a family bound not by blood, but by something perhaps even stronger. Shared values, shared sacrifice, and the enduring legacy of a man who had lived and died by the principle that we are all responsible for one another. 6 months after Captain Michael Lawson's funeral, Emma sat at her kitchen table, sorting through the day's mail. Bills, advertisements, a card from Lily, who was back at college finishing her nursing degree. At the bottom of the stack was an official-looking envelope with the Department of Veterans Affairs logo in the corner. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Since Michael's death, official correspondence still triggered a moment of dread, a flashback to notification officers at her door. Inside was a letter informing her that a new Veterans Outreach Center was being dedicated the following week. It would be named the Captain Michael T. Lawson Veterans Support Center. The letter, signed by General Anderson himself, invited Emma to be the guest of honor at the dedication ceremony. Emma set the letter down, her eyes drifting to the shadow box hanging on her living room wall. Inside was Michael's posthumously awarded Silver Star, along with his service ribbons, and the photograph of him in uniform that had been displayed at his funeral. Beside it hung another frame, a collection of newspaper clippings about what had happened at Pinewood Memorial Services, what had begun as a private confrontation over an unethical billing practice had evolved into something much larger, a catalyst for change that none of them could have anticipated. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Jake Simmons. Mrs. Lawson, I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, Jake. How are things at the VA? After General Anderson's recommendation, Jake had been hired by the Department of Veterans Affairs as part of a new initiative to reform funeral benefits for military families. The program had grown from a local effort to a national model. That's actually why I'm calling, Jake said, his voice animated with purpose. The Lawson Act is going before Congress next week. Emma smiled at the name. The proposed legislation, inspired by what had happened to her family, would establish strict transparency requirements for funeral homes serving military families and enhance the penalties for those who engaged in predatory practices. General Anderson asked me to see if you'd be willing to testify at the hearing. Your story, Michael's story, is what's driving this forward. Emma hesitated. Public speaking had never been her strength, and the thought of recounting her experience before a congressional committee was intimidating. Yet she could almost hear Michael's voice in her mind. Sometimes the hardest things to do are the most important, Mum. I'll do it, she said with newfound resolve. Michael would want me to. That's what I told the general you'd say, Jake replied, the smile evident in his voice. I'll email you the details. And Mrs. Lawson, Thank you. What we're doing, it's going to help thousands of families." After hanging up, Emma walked to the window, looking out at her garden, where spring flowers were beginning to emerge from the soil Michael had helped her till the last time he was home on leave. Life continuing, growing, even through grief. The past 6 months had taught her that while sorrow never truly disappears, it can transform into purpose. The morning of the dedication ceremony dawned clear and mild, a perfect spring day. Emma, dressed carefully in a blue suit that Michael had once told her brought out her eyes. Around her neck hung a small gold pendant containing a tiny portion of her son's ashes. The rest had been interred at Arlington, but she kept this small piece close to her heart. Lieutenant Reeves, now Captain Reeves following a recent promotion, arrived to drive Emma to the ceremony. In the months since the funeral, Sarah Reeves had become a regular visitor to the Lawson home, sharing more stories of Michael and gradually becoming something between a daughter and a friend to Emma. Today she wore her dress uniform, medals gleaming in the morning sunlight. "Nervous?" Sarah asked, as they drove toward the outskirts of town where the new center had been built. "A little," Emma admitted. "I'm not used to being the center of attention." Sarah smiled. "Michael always said you were the strongest person he knew. He told us once that everything he knew about courage he learned from watching you raise 2 kids on your own while his dad was deployed." Emma hadn't heard this before, and the revelation brought fresh tears to her eyes. "He never told me that." "He probably thought you already knew," Sarah replied. "That was Michael. He assumed everyone could see the best in themselves the way he saw it." As they approached the center, Emma was startled by the number of vehicles already parked. In the lot and along the adjacent streets, a crowd had gathered in front of a modern 1-story building with large windows and a stone facade. Over the entrance, covered by a ceremonial drape, was what Emma assumed would be the dedication plaque. General Anderson waited at the entrance, resplendent in his full-dress uniform. Beside him stood a group of dignitaries, the mayor, state representatives, VA officials. But what caught Emma's attention were the faces she recognized from Michael's funeral, veterans who had stood vigil at Pinewood Memorial Services, soldiers who had served with her son, community members who had lined the streets for his procession. "Mrs. Lawson," Anderson greeted her warmly, taking her hand in both of his. "Thank you for coming. This day wouldn't be complete without you." "I'm honored, General," she replied, genuinely moved by the turnout. "I had no idea it would be such a large event." Anderson's eyes crinkled with his smile. "Word travels fast in our community, and what's happening here? It's important. It's changing how we care for our veterans and their families." He led her to a row of seats at the front of the assembled crowd. As Emma took her place, she noticed Robert Caldwell sitting several rows back. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave a respectful nod, which she returned. His presence surprised her, but somehow it felt right, a testament to the possibility of change, even from the most unlikely sources. The ceremony began with a color guard presentation and national anthem. The mayor spoke first, welcoming everyone, and emphasizing the community's commitment to supporting its military members and veterans. Several other officials followed with brief remarks about the importance of the new center and the services it would provide. Then General Anderson took the podium. His commanding presence immediately focused the attention of the crowd. "6 months ago," he began, "we gathered to honor the life and sacrifice of Captain Michael Lawson. Today, we continue that honor by ensuring his legacy lives on in service to others, just as he would have wanted." Anderson recounted Michael's military career briefly, highlighting his leadership and commitment to his soldiers. Then his tone shifted. But Captain Lawson's impact didn't end with his sacrifice on the battlefield. What happened after his death, right here in this community, sparked a national conversation about how we treat our Gold Star families. It exposed practices that had been exploiting the very people who have given the most for our country. And it inspired action. He gestured toward the building behind him. This center will provide comprehensive support to veterans and military families, from mental health services to benefit navigation to emergency financial assistance. No veteran who walks through these doors will face bureaucracy alone. No military family in crisis will be turned away. Anderson's gaze found Emma, and none of this would be happening without the courage of one Gold Star mother who refused to allow her son's memory to be dishonored. Mrs. Emma Lawson showed us that sometimes the greatest tribute we can pay to the fallen is to fight for what's right, just as they did. He invited Emma to join him at the podium. Her legs felt unsteady as she rose, but Captain Reeves gave her arm a reassuring squeeze. As she made her way to the front, the entire assembly rose to their feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. The thunderous applause washed over her like a wave, carrying with it the community's respect and support. When she reached the podium, Anderson stepped aside, allowing her to address the crowd. Emma hadn't prepared formal remarks, trusting that the right words would come. She looked out at the sea of faces, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes, all united by their presence on this day. "Thank you," she began, her voice stronger than she had expected. "When I lost Michael, I thought my world had ended. The grief is overwhelming. But what I've discovered over these past months is that grief can be a beginning as well as an end." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Michael always believed that one person could make a difference. He lived that belief every day of his military career. What I never expected was that he would continue making a difference even after he was gone. Emma spoke from the heart about the journey from that difficult day at Pinewood Memorial Services to this moment of community transformation. She described how the support of veterans and military families had carried her through the darkest times, how the legacy of her son's sacrifice had inspired changes that would benefit countless others. "This center isn't just about Michael," she continued. "It's about all of our sons and daughters who serve. It's about recognizing that the commitment we make to them shouldn't end when they come home, or when they don't. It's about creating a community where sacrifice is honored not just with words, but with actions that make a real difference in people's lives." As she concluded her remarks, Emma noticed faces in the crowd move to tears, veterans nodding in solemn agreement, younger service members watching with renewed purpose. In that moment, she felt Michael's presence more strongly than she had since losing him, not as a phantom of grief, but as an enduring force for good continuing through the lives he had touched. Anderson rejoined her at the podium and directed their attention to the draped plaque above the center's entrance. At his signal, 2 veterans pulled cords that released the covering, revealing a bronze plaque bearing Michael's name, rank, and dates of service, along with the words, "In honor of his sacrifice and in service to all who have worn the uniform." As applause rose once more, Anderson leaned closer to Emma. "There's someone else who would like to say a few words, if that's all right with you." Emma looked at him questioningly, and he nodded toward the crowd. To her surprise, Robert Caldwell was making his way to the podium. Anderson yielded his place, and Caldwell stood before the microphone, visibly nervous but determined. "Mrs. Lawson has graciously permitted me to speak today, though many of you know I don't deserve that kindness," he began. "6 months ago, I betrayed the trust of a Gold Star family at the most vulnerable moment imaginable. It was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of exploitation that had become standard practice at my funeral home, a pattern I had convinced myself was simply business. A murmur ran through the crowd, but no one interrupted. Caldwell continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. What happened that day, when this community rallied around the Lawson family, forced me to confront who I had become? It would have been easier to dismiss it as bad publicity, make token changes, and continue as before. Many businesses do exactly that when their unethical practices are exposed. He paused, looking directly at Emma. But witnessing the honor and integrity demonstrated by everyone involved, from General Anderson to Jake Simmons to the hundreds of veterans who stood in solidarity, I couldn't hide from the contrast with my own actions. Caldwell turned back to the audience. Today, I'm here to announce that Pinewood Memorial Services has been completely restructured. We've implemented a transparent pricing model for all families, with specific provisions for military service members. We've established a fund to reimburse military families who were overcharged in the past, and we've partnered with the VA to train our staff in the specific needs and benefits available to veterans and their loved ones. He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. Additionally, I'm donating the building that formerly housed Pinewood's administrative offices to serve as transitional housing for homeless veterans in coordination with this new center. It's not enough to make up for past wrongs, but it's a start toward a different future. The announcement was met with surprised applause. Emma felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication, certainly, but also appreciation for the difficult journey Caldwell had undertaken. Redemption rarely came without cost, and his willingness to embrace accountability publicly suggested a genuine transformation. As the formal ceremony concluded, attendees were invited to tour the new center. Emma found herself surrounded by well-wishers, many sharing stories of how the events following Michael's death had inspired changes in their own lives. Veterans spoke of finding the courage to seek help for long-ignored trauma. Community members described new initiatives to support military families. Young service members expressed gratitude for the improved systems that would be there if they ever needed them. Jake Simmons approached with a tall man in a tailored suit whom he introduced as Congressman Howard, the primary sponsor of the Lawson Act. Mrs. Lawson, the congressman greeted her, your testimony next week will be crucial to getting this legislation passed. The committee needs to hear directly from someone who has experienced these issues firsthand. I'll do whatever is needed, Emma assured him, though I'm not accustomed to speaking before Congress. Just tell your story exactly as it happened, he advised. The facts speak for themselves, and Jake here has been instrumental in crafting the technical aspects of the bill. Jake smiled modestly. I'm just building on what started here. This community showed what's possible when people stand together against exploitation. As they talked, Emma noticed Captain Reeves deep in conversation with Robert Caldwell near the center's main entrance. Their discussion appeared intense but not antagonistic. After a few minutes, they shook hands, and Reeves made her way back to Emma's side. Everything all right? Emma asked. Reeves nodded. Mr. Caldwell wanted to know if the center could use volunteer grief counselors. His wife is a licensed therapist, and they're both taking specialized training in military family bereavement. He asked if that would be welcome or inappropriate, given his history. What did you tell him? My dad, that redemption isn't just about words or even donations. It's about sustained commitment to doing better. If he's sincere, his experience could actually be valuable. Understanding how systems fail families is the first step to fixing them. Emma thought about this. Michael always believed people deserved second chances. He said we're all more than our worst mistakes. He lived that belief, Reeves agreed. There was a soldier in our unit who made a serious error during an operation, nearly got several people killed. Most officers would have had him transferred out immediately, but Michael worked with him personally, trained with him after hours. That soldier ended up saving 3 lives during our next deployment. General Anderson joined them, accompanied by several of the men who had served with Michael on his final mission. Staff Sergeant Ramirez, who had spoken at the funeral, walked with a more confident gait now, his recovery progressing visibly. "Mrs. Lawson," Ramirez said, "we wanted to show you something before you leave today." He led Emma to a quiet room at the back of the center. Unlike the administrative spaces they had passed through, this room had the feeling of a memorial. The walls were lined with photographs of service members from the local community who had fallen in various conflicts, each accompanied by a brief biography and remembrance. "We're calling it the Remembrance Room," Anderson explained. "A place where families can come to honor their loved ones, and where younger veterans can connect with the legacy of those who served before them." In the center of the room stood a glass display case. Inside was Michael's combat helmet, the one he had been wearing on his final mission. Beside it lay his well-worn compass, dog tags, and a folded letter. "His personal effects," Emma whispered, recognizing items she had last seen when they were returned to her after his death. "He would have wanted them here," Ramirez said, "where they can inspire others rather than stored away in a box." Emma nodded, unable to speak through her emotions. The display honored Michael not as a symbol or abstraction, but as the real soldier he had been, pragmatic, dedicated, human. As they left the remembrance room, the center's newly appointed director approached with news that lunch was being served in the community hall for all attendees. The celebration was transitioning from ceremony to community gathering, exactly as Michael would have wanted. Throughout the afternoon, Emma moved among the various groups, listening more than speaking, absorbing the impact of what had grown from their family's difficult experience. Veterans of different eras found common ground in shared experiences. Active duty personnel connected with support services they hadn't known existed. Family members of deployed soldiers exchanged contact information, forming impromptu support networks. Late in the day, as the crowd was thinning, Emma found herself standing with General Anderson near the center's entrance, watching the continuing interactions. "You've started something remarkable, Mrs. Lawson," he observed, "far beyond what any of us anticipated that day at Pinewood." "I just stood up for my son," she replied. "Everything else came from this community, from people like Jake and Sarah and all these veterans." Anderson shook his head. "It took a catalyst, someone willing to say, 'This is wrong,' when it would have been easier to simply pay the bill and stay quiet. That courage inspired others." Emma thought about this. Perhaps that's Michael's real legacy then. Not just the lives he saved in combat, but this ripple effect that continues to grow. "The best memorials are always living ones," Anderson agreed. "Not just stone and bronze, but changes in how we live and treat one another." As Emma prepared to leave, Captain Reeves approached with a small package. "Mrs. Lawson, before you go, this arrived at the base for you last week. It's from Afghanistan." Emma accepted the carefully wrapped parcel, curious. Opening it, she found a hand-carved wooden box with intricate designs. Inside was a letter written in careful English and a photograph of a young Afghan girl standing proudly in front of a small school building. The letter explained that the girl was from a village where Michael's unit had helped establish a school during his second deployment. The building had recently been expanded with funds from a memorial donation made in Captain Lawson's name. The girl, now a teacher herself, wanted Michael's mother to know that her son's kindness continued to change lives halfway around the world. "He never told me about this school," Emma said, studying the photograph. "That was Michael," Reeves smiled, "always doing good quietly, never seeking recognition." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the new center that bore her son's name, Emma stood for a moment in silent reflection. The day had been overwhelming, filled with emotions that ranged from profound grief to unexpected pride. Yet through it all ran a thread of certainty that Michael's life, though cut tragically short, had mattered in ways that continued to unfold. Captain Reeves waited patiently by her car, ready to drive Emma home. The dedication was over, but Emma understood that in many ways it was just the beginning. Tomorrow she would begin preparing for her congressional testimony. Next month, the transitional housing for homeless veterans would open in the converted Pinewood offices. The week after that, a new class of VA family counselors trained to understand the unique needs of Gold Star families would begin work at centers across the country. Michael's legacy was no longer just about what he had done in life, but about what his memory continued to inspire. From the exploitation of a grieving family had grown a movement for change that would benefit thousands. From one mother's stand for dignity had come systemic reforms that would protect others from similar experiences. As Emma walked toward Captain Reeves's waiting car, she touched the pendant containing Michael's ashes that hung around her neck. "You're still making a difference, son," she whispered, still leading the way. The evening air carried the scent of spring flowers and new possibilities. Behind her, the Captain Michael T. Lawson Veterans Support Center stood as a testament not just to one soldier's sacrifice, but to a community's commitment to honoring that sacrifice through action. Its lights would remain on late into the night, a beacon of support for those who had served and those who loved them. In her grief, Emma had discovered a purpose that transcended personal loss. In standing up for her son's memory, she had become part of a movement larger than herself. And in that knowledge, she found a measure of peace that, while it could never erase her sorrow, allowed her to carry it with newfound strength and dignity. 1 year to the day after Captain Michael Lawson's funeral, Emma stood before the imposing marble facade of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. The morning sun glinted off its dome, casting long shadows across the plaza where tourists and government workers hurried past. Emma adjusted her blazer, smoothed her skirt, and took a deep breath. Beside her, Lily squeezed her hand in silent support. "Ready, Mom?" Lily asked, her eyes reflecting the same nervous determination Emma felt. Emma nodded, glancing down at the leather portfolio in her free hand. Inside was her prepared testimony for today's congressional hearing on the Lawson Act, legislation that had grown from a local incident into a national movement for reform. What had begun as one funeral, directors' attempt to exploit a Gold Star family, had revealed a pattern of predatory practices targeting military families across the country. "As ready as I'll ever be," Emma replied. "Your brother would probably find this all rather amusing, me testifying before Congress." Lily smiled. "He'd be proud, Mom. So proud." They ascended the steps together, passing through security and following a congressional aide through marble corridors to the hearing room. The space was smaller than Emma had imagined from watching hearings on television, more intimate and somehow more intimidating for its modesty. Committee members were already taking their seats at the elevated dais, aides whispering in their ears, papers being shuffled. In the gallery, Emma spotted familiar faces: General Anderson in his dress uniform, Captain Reeves sitting beside him, Jake Simmons looking almost unrecognizable in a crisp suit instead of his usual casual attire. From across the room, Jake gave her an encouraging thumbs up. Behind them sat dozens of veterans and military family members, many wearing small blue ribbons that had become the symbol of the movement sparked by Michael's story. The committee chairman, a silver-haired senator with a son currently serving overseas, called the hearing to order. After opening statements outlining the purpose of the proposed legislation, he invited the first witness, Emma, to the table. She took her seat at the witness table, adjusted the microphone, and looked up at the row of legislators. Their faces were attentive, genuinely interested rather than performing for cameras. This particular hearing wasn't high-profile enough to attract much media attention, which made it all the more meaningful that the gallery was filled with people who cared deeply about the issue. "Mrs. Lawson," the chairman began, "thank you for being here today. Your courage in coming forward with your experience has brought to light practices that have been hurting military families for far too long. Would you please share your story?" With the committee, Emma opened her portfolio, though she hardly needed her notes. The events were etched into her memory with painful clarity. She began simply describing Michael's service, his final mission, and the devastating news of his death. Then she recounted her experience at Pinewood Memorial Services, the manipulative tactics, the inflated costs, the exploitation of grief and patriotic sentiment to extract profit from a family already suffering unbearable loss. "Mr. Caldwell told me that my son deserved more than basic services," Emma said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "He leveraged my love and grief to sell services Michael wouldn't have wanted and we couldn't afford. What I didn't know then was that many of these upgraded services were already covered by military benefits the funeral home should have helped us access rather than duplicating at our expense." A congresswoman from a district with a large military base leaned forward. "Mrs. Lawson, you mentioned that your community intervened when they learned what was happening. Could you elaborate on that?" Emma described how Jake Simmons had reported the predatory practices, how veterans and active duty personnel had rallied around her family, and how their collective action had not only resolved her immediate situation, but sparked awareness of a nationwide problem. "What happened to my family wasn't unique," Emma continued. "Since Michael's funeral, I've heard from hundreds of military families who experienced similar exploitation. Many didn't have a community stepping in to help them. Many paid those inflated costs, going into debt to honor their loved ones because they felt they had no choice." The hearing room was silent except for Emma's voice and the occasional scratch of pens on notepads. Even the most politically divided committee members were united in their attention to her testimony. "The Lawson Act won't bring my son back," Emma concluded, "but it will ensure that other families experiencing the worst day of their lives aren't subjected to predatory practices when they're most vulnerable. It will require transparency in pricing, prohibit misrepresentation of military benefits, and establish a clear process for reporting and resolving violations. Most importantly, it will affirm our national commitment to treating Gold Star families with the dignity and respect they deserve." For the next 40 minutes, committee members asked thoughtful questions about specific aspects of Emma's experience and the proposed legislation. She answered each query directly, occasionally deferring technical points to Jake Simmons, who had helped draft the bill's language based on his insider knowledge of the funeral industry. When the chairman finally thanked her for her testimony, the gallery erupted in applause, a breach of formal protocol that the chairman allowed to continue for several moments before gently restoring order. As Emma returned to her seat beside Lily, she felt a curious lightness, as if sharing her story in this forum had lifted some of the weight she had carried since Michael's death. The hearing continued with testimony from industry experts, veterans advocates, and even Robert Caldwell, who had volunteered to speak about how funeral homes could implement ethical practices for military families. His presence and his forthright acknowledgement of his past exploitation added credibility to the case for reform. By the time the hearing concluded 3 hours later, it was clear that the Lawson Act had strong bipartisan support. The chairman announced that the committee would vote to advance the legislation the following week, with floor consideration expected before the congressional recess. Outside the hearing room, Emma found herself surrounded by military families who had traveled to Washington to support the bill. Many shared their own stories of predatory practices during their most vulnerable moments. Others simply wanted to thank her for giving voice to an experience they had suffered through in silence. An elderly woman in her 80s approached with tears in her eyes. "My Harold died in Vietnam," she said, clutching Emma's hands. "The funeral home did the same thing to me, charged me for a special casket they said was required for military honors. I paid it because I didn't know any better, went into debt for years afterward. For 50 years I thought it was just me." Emma embraced the woman, understanding the unique bond they shared across generations. "It was never just you," she assured her. "And it stops now." General Anderson made his way through the crowd to Emma's side. "Powerful testimony," he said simply. "The committee was moved. This bill will pass." "Then what?" Emma asked, suddenly aware that her purpose for the past year, seeing the Lawson Act become law, was nearing completion. Anderson smiled knowingly. "Then the real work begins. Implementation, education, ensuring military families know their rights and funeral homes fulfill their responsibilities." He paused. "Actually, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you. Do you have time for lunch?" Emma glanced at Lily, who nodded encouragingly. "We don't fly back until tomorrow," Emma confirmed. "Excellent," Anderson replied. "There's a small restaurant near here where we can talk privately. Captain Reeves and Jake will join us, if that's all right." The restaurant was a quiet establishment, frequented by congressional staffers and government officials seeking discretion. Anderson had reserved a private room in the back where they could speak without interruption. After orders were placed and drinks served, he got straight to the point. "Emma," he began, dropping the formality of Mrs. Lawson for the first time, "what you've accomplished this past year is remarkable, taking personal tragedy and transforming it into meaningful. Change isn't something many people manage to do." Emma shook her head modestly. "I just told my story. Everyone else did the real work." "That's not true," Jake interjected. "Your willingness to speak out when it would have been easier to retreat into private grief gave this movement its moral center. People respond to your authenticity." Captain Reeves nodded in agreement. "The Lawson Center back home has become a model for similar facilities across the country. Communities are looking at what we've built and asking how they can create the same support systems for their veterans and military families." Anderson leaned forward. "Which brings me to my proposal. The Pentagon has created a new advisory and council on military family support. Its mandate is to identify gaps in existing programs and recommend policy changes to address them. The Secretary of Defense has asked me to extend an invitation to you to serve as the Council's civilian co-chair." Emma blinked in surprise. "Me? But I'm not a policy expert. I'm not even—" "You're exactly what this council needs," Anderson interrupted gently. "You bring the lived experience that most senior officials lack. You've demonstrated an ability to navigate complex systems while keeping the human impact at the center of the conversation. The best policies come from people who understand the problems firsthand," Reeves added. "Your perspective would be invaluable." Emma took a sip of water, trying to process the unexpected offer. "What would it involve, practically speaking?" "Quarterly meetings in Washington," Anderson explained. "Some travel to military installations to meet with families. Regular calls with working groups. It's a 2-year appointment with the possibility of renewal. There's a modest stipend, though I know that's not your motivation. And there's a foundation willing to establish a fellowship to cover your other expenses," Jake added. "They've been following your advocacy work and reached out to me last month about supporting your continued involvement." Emma looked around. The table at these people who had become such an important part of her life since Michael's death, allies in grief who had helped her find purpose in advocacy. Their confidence in her was humbling and somewhat intimidating. "I'm not sure I'm qualified," she admitted. Lily, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Mom, remember what Michael used to say about leadership? That the people who think they have all the answers usually don't, and the people who question their own qualifications are often exactly who should be in charge." Emma smiled at the memory. Michael had developed that philosophy after his first deployment, when an overconfident lieutenant had nearly gotten their unit into serious trouble. "Besides," Lily continued, "you won't be doing it alone. You'll have General Anderson, Captain Reeves, Jake, a whole network of people who share your commitment." "And Michael," Emma said softly, "he'll be with me too, in a way." Anderson nodded. "In every family we help, in every policy we improve, his legacy continues." Emma didn't answer immediately, taking time to consider the magnitude of what was being proposed. The personal cost would be significant. Time away from home, emotional energy spent repeatedly engaging with difficult issues, the responsibility of representing thousands of military families, but the potential impact was even greater. "I need to think about it," she said finally, "but I'm honored to be considered." "Of course," Anderson replied. "Take all the time you need. The position doesn't formally begin until next quarter." As their lunch concluded, Emma felt a familiar mix of grief and purpose, the emotional landscape she had inhabited since losing Michael. But there was something else too, a growing sense that her journey was not simply about honoring her son's memory, but about creating something new from the broken pieces left behind. That evening, alone in her hotel room, Emma called her sister Catherine in Oregon. After updating her on the hearing and Anderson's unexpected offer, she waited for her sister's reaction. "What are you thinking?" Catherine asked, knowing Emma well enough to sense her hesitation. "I'm thinking that when Michael died, I thought my life was over too, in a way," Emma replied. "I couldn't imagine finding meaning again after such loss. And now, somehow, I'm being offered a chance to shape policies that could help thousands of families like ours." "It's not what you would have chosen," Catherine acknowledged, "but it seems like it's choosing you." "That's exactly it," Emma agreed. "It feels less like something I'm deciding and more like something I'm recognizing, a path that's been forming under my feet without my noticing." "Michael would be so proud," Catherine said, "not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become through all this." After they hung up, Emma stood at the hotel window, looking out at the illuminated monuments of Washington. The city was a place of power and policy, far removed from her quiet life in Riverdale. Yet somehow, improbably, her personal story had created ripples that reached all the way here, to the halls of government where decisions affecting millions were made. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her, a woman transformed by grief but not defined by it. Behind her on the desk lay the day's Washington Post, open to a small article about the hearing. The headline read, "Gold Star Mother's Testimony Moves Committee to Action on Funeral Reform." There was a photograph of Emma leaving the Capitol, her expression composed and determined. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago, shattered by loss, intimidated by a predatory funeral director, uncertain of her path forward. That woman could never have imagined testifying before Congress or being invited to advise the Pentagon. Yet here she was, standing in the nation's capital, her son's story having opened doors that led to unimagined possibilities for service. Emma reached for her phone and composed a text to General Anderson. "I'll accept the position. Michael taught me that when you have the opportunity to make a difference, you take it." His reply came within minutes. "He would be proud of your decision. We all are." The following morning, before their flight home, Emma and Lily made a pilgrimage to Arlington National Cemetery. Though they visited Michael's grave regularly in the year since his burial, this visit felt different, a chance to share with him, in some spiritual sense, the developments of the past 24 hours. Arlington was peaceful in the early morning. Light, the perfectly aligned rows of white markers stretching across rolling green hills. Emma and Lily walked the familiar path to Section 60, where many of the fallen from recent conflicts rested. Michael's headstone was simple, like all the others. Name, rank, dates of birth and death, military branch, conflicts served, awards received, so much life distilled into so few words. Emma knelt beside the grave, running her fingers over the engraved letters of her son's name. Lily placed a small bouquet of forget-me-nots, Michael's favorite flower since childhood, at the base of the stone. "We did it, Michael," Emma said softly. "The bill is going to pass. It's going to help so many families." She told him about the advisory council position, the responsibility she was taking on, the chance to ensure other military families received the support they deserved. As she spoke, a groundskeeper working nearby paused in his duties. He approached, respectfully waiting until Emma fell silent before speaking. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "Are you Captain Lawson's mother?" Emma nodded, surprised to be recognized. "I thought so," the man continued. "I take special care of this section. Been working at Arlington for 32 years. He gestured to Michael's headstone. "I've noticed your son gets more visitors than most. Not just family, servicemen and women, some in uniform, some not. They leave coins, unit insignia, notes." Emma had noticed these tokens on previous visits but hadn't realized how unusual the frequency was. "They talk to him sometimes," the groundskeeper added. "I don't eavesdrop, but I hear bits and pieces. They tell him about changes being made because of him, about something called the Lawson Act." He smiled gently. "Thought you might want to know that even when you're not here, he's not alone." Tears filled Emma's eyes at this unexpected gift. The knowledge that Michael's resting place had become a site of pilgrimage and reflection for others whose lives had been touched by his story. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know." The groundskeeper nodded and moved away, returning to his duties and leaving mother and daughter to their private moment. Emma remained kneeling for a few minutes longer, absorbing the peace of the place and the comfort of knowing Michael's legacy continued to grow in ways she couldn't always see. As they walked back toward the cemetery entrance, Lily linked her arm through her mother's. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "After I finish nursing school next year, I want to apply to work at a VA hospital, maybe even get specialized training in PTSD treatment." Emma looked at her daughter in surprise. Lily had always planned to work in pediatrics. "Michael's story changed my perspective," Lily explained. "I've seen how much difference the right support at the right time can make for veterans and their families. I want to be part of that." Emma squeezed her daughter's arm, too moved to speak immediately. Michael's influence extending to his sister's career path was yet another ripple effect she hadn't anticipated. "He would be honored," she said finally, "and so am I." Their rental car was parked near the cemetery's visitors' center. As they approached it, Emma noticed a man in civilian clothes standing beside it, waiting. It took her a moment to recognize Robert Caldwell without his usual funeral director attire. "Mrs. Lawson," he greeted her tentatively. "I hope you don't mind. General Anderson mentioned you would be here this morning." Emma regarded him with surprise but not hostility. In the year since Michael's funeral, Caldwell had undergone a remarkable transformation, from predatory businessman to advocate for reform within his industry. He had made full restitution to the military families his funeral home had overcharged, implemented transparent pricing practices, and testified alongside Emma in support of the Lawson Act. "Mr. Caldwell," she acknowledged. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I wanted to thank you," he said, his usual polish replaced by genuine humility, "not just for your testimony yesterday, which was powerful, but for something more personal. You could have destroyed my business after what I did. You had every right to. Instead, you allowed me the chance to make amends, to be part of the solution rather than just a cautionary tale." Emma considered his words. Everyone deserves the opportunity to learn and change. Michael believed that strongly. Caldwell nodded. "I've been thinking about your son a lot this past year. A man I never met has completely changed the course of my life." He handed Emma an envelope. "I wanted you to have this. It's the charter for a new foundation we've established, the Military Family Funeral Support Fund. It will cover all funeral expenses not covered by military benefits for families in need." Emma opened the envelope and scanned the document. The foundation had been seeded with a substantial personal contribution from Caldwell and had commitments from several funeral home chains to participate. "This is significant," she said, genuinely impressed. "It's just a beginning," Caldwell replied. "The industry needs systemic change. The Lawson Act will help create legal requirements, but cultural change takes longer. This foundation is part of shifting how funeral directors see their responsibility to military families." As they spoke, a group of uniformed Marines passed by, heading toward the section where one of their own was being laid to rest that day. They nodded respectfully to Emma, recognizing her from media coverage of the Lawson Act. "I should let you get to your flight," Caldwell said. "I just wanted you to know that your son's legacy reaches even to people who never had the honor of meeting him. People like me who learn through his story what true service means." After Caldwell departed, Emma and Lily continued to their car. As they drove away from Arlington, the cemetery's quiet dignity gave way to the bustling energy of Washington. Emma found herself reflecting on the unexpected trajectory of the past year, from devastating loss to meaningful advocacy, from isolated grief to a community of purpose. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Lily said as they navigated toward the airport. "That first day at Pinewood, when we felt so powerless. When Mr. Caldwell thought he could take advantage of us because we were just two women dealing with grief." Emma nodded, remembering the weight of that moment. "Look at us now," Lily continued. "Congressional testimony, Pentagon advisory councils, nationwide legislation. All because we didn't stay quiet when something was wrong. Not just us," Emma corrected gently. "We had help. Jake, General Anderson, Captain Reeves, all those veterans who showed up that day." "But it started with us," Lily insisted. "With you refusing to accept what was happening." Emma considered this as the Washington skyline receded behind them. Perhaps that was Michael's greatest legacy, not just the lives he had saved in combat or the policies changed in his name, but the way his story had awakened courage in others, in his mother who found her voice, in his sister who discovered a new calling, in a community that rallied around principles of dignity and respect, even in a funeral director who found redemption through confronting his own failures. Michael always said, "The measure of a life well lived isn't in achievements or recognition." Emma reflected. "It's in how you change the lives around you for the better." By that standard, her son's brief life had been immeasurably successful. The ripples of his influence continued to spread outward, touching lives he could never have imagined affecting, creating change in systems far beyond his direct experience. As their plane lifted off from Reagan National Airport, Emma looked down at the capital city growing smaller beneath them. She thought about the journey ahead. The advisory council role, the implementation of the Lawson Act, Lily's new career direction, and felt a sense of purpose that coexisted with her enduring grief. Michael was gone, a reality that would never cease to break her heart, but his story continued, evolving in ways that transformed loss into legacy, pain into purpose, and individual tragedy into collective action for change. In that knowledge, Emma found not just consolation, but inspiration. the understanding that even the darkest moments contain seeds of possibility, waiting to be nurtured into something meaningful and enduring. As she had told the Congressional Committee, the Lawson Act wouldn't bring her son back. Nothing could, but it would ensure that his sacrifice created a world slightly better than the one he had left behind. And in that continuing story, Michael lived on. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.